Hi George, how are you?
Hey, Ankur. Doing good. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for asking.
Happy New Year's.
Happy New Year to you as well, and
Hey.
to everyone who's joined in from Team UUKI. And I think we should get started as more people join in. And should we start?
Good to go.
Sure. So this is the first event of the year, and we chose this topic as we've seen a lot of creators sort of building micro communities on different platforms. And there was a mindset that communities need to be bigger or larger in number, in volume, to actually be meaningful. But I think a micro, well-knit community with engagement is a thing, and it's picking up, and it can build a lot of engagement for your product, for you as a brand. So so that's the topic we're talking about: micro communities and how they can unlock the user journey for your customers if you're building a product, and for you if you're an influencer. Sneha, so you can. Talking about myself, I'm the co-founder of UUKI, and UUKI is a white label community platform for brands, businesses, and creators. We help you set up your community, your own branded community, directly on your website or an app, with integration, with discussion, having live events, hosting a membership by connecting your account, and so on and so forth. And we've Anil, me, and I look at the business end, and Anil is the CTO of the product. Yeah, so I mentioned why we chose this topic. It's super important for now for creators to have an engaging audience with them, and in the future, that audience can be turned into a community, and even a smaller group of engaged user is as important as even a larger audience. So I think George, so with his experience, I think in the next slide, we'll talk about his journey in community building. So George is head of culture and community at Bitcoin Association, having been recognized by Business Insider, Entrepreneur, and Tech in Asia for his contribution to community building. And also, he's managed multiple clients having net worth of $2.5 billion, couple of $1 billion. That's huge. And also, he works on bridging the gap between community and technology. And he loves playing Go. I picked up Go sometime back. George, over to you. You can talk about how you got into the community space, about your journey, and how are things.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction. So just to add on to what's already on the screen, I got into, professional community management, community building about a decade ago now. So I actually stumbled upon the community manager role for a co-working space in Melbourne, Australia, about a decade ago. So, it really began with offline communities, and then I made my way into online community building after that. So while building community for co-working spaces, and then seeing how that translated into online communities was a good sort of segue and bridge. Community building in the online space has of course existed, since the 90s, I'd say, with forums and then into social, gaming, etc. So I've been across a lot of different types of communities. I got involved with Bitcoin actually around 2013 through this co-working space. We had Australia's first Bitcoin ATM at the time. And so that was my exposure. And I was actually really fascinated by sort of the cultural undercurrents of Bitcoin communities in Melbourne back in those days. So we were actually meeting up with people in shady alleyways, exchanging Bitcoin for cash, etc. Buying beer at some local pubs using Bitcoin. I remember, using my phone and paying with Bitcoin at the time. I thought it was like amazing. And then that translated, of course, through the rocky history of Bitcoin in general. And that sort of timeline of traversing Bitcoin, then through to cryptocurrencies, ICOs, NFTs, etc. over time, that all naturally grew and developed. And during that time, I was also going from the local co-working space scene. Then I moved into corporate, and I was working with large fintech companies when I got into corporate. So yeah, and then in 2018, I set up a company called Fire in Singapore, and my theory was that community was going to become a lot more important in the blockchain space. And yeah, fast forward a couple of years, we can see that definitely is the case now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's I think the early days of Bitcoin were super interesting, and I think the conference had 8 people join in for Bitcoin, and it's been some interesting journey for Bitcoin in all these years. Yeah, I think you're one of the OGs for community building. If you started a decade ago, before it was all cool, and in the days set up a community. Yeah, talking about so what exactly are micro communities? And I think we've talked about the origin story. We can go to the next slide. And yeah, so how do you define a micro community? So is there a number to it, or what is a specific sort of what is a micro community versus a general community? Yeah.
So a micro community, from the definition that I've been going off of, is a community that's less than 100. It could be a handful, people, a dozen as well. But generally, it's, if you look at, say, like the Web3 landscape of today, a lot of folks often confuse audiences with communities. So they'll think that, oh, I'm building a community of like 10, 20, 30,000 people, or I'm trying to build like a 1 million person community. It starts not to make sense after a certain scale. And you'll realize this if you've ever taken a community from like a handful of people all the way up to those tens or hundreds of thousands or even 1 million people. Because there is a sense of community can actually start to dissipate once we get larger. And that 100-person mark is close to the Dunbar number. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Dunbar number, right? Most community professionals are familiar with it, and that's at 150. So it kind of works on par with that. And if we use that, so if you're looking at 100, 150, that's a good size. And it's actually a size that is much more manageable. It's very tight knit, and people can still know each other by name without losing that sense of camaraderie, closeness, and intimacy. So I'd say that's the definition.
I think that's something to keep in mind. I think the Dunbar number, as you mentioned, how many people you can know by name. I think keeping it below 100 is, I think, something we can look at as a micro community versus a larger community. I think we can go to the next slide. So yeah, I think this is jumping ahead. So how do you sort of, as a marketer or a community builder, unlock sort of growth in a community, and in the longer term unlock sort of a user acquisition? So they might be your users if you're a product, and you would want them to be part of the community and build from an audience or a user to a community member. And then sort of how do you sort of begin the first word of mouth? So people have joined in as a user, they found value, they were looking at some tutorial or your sort of use cases, and they stumbled upon the community thing in your product. And how do you sort of drive them to invite others with word of mouth, or to be your ambassador And long term, that is equivalent to, say, acquisition and retention.
Yeah, I think with modern marketing, you really have to learn by doing. Um, for example, Web3, I often get everything I need to know through Twitter. There's obviously communities across Discord, Telegram, a lot of different channels. But for the most part, the pulse in terms of finding uncommon growth tactics and strategies is coming through Twitter. And it's also by knowing how to work specific platforms for your customer acquisition and retention efforts. And actually, if I'm honest, if you use things like ChatGPT right now, you could probably ask it, this same question, and it could probably get a better answer, in terms of average of myself and many other people. But it's always the execution aspect, right? So ChatGPT can give you the tactics and strategies, but then it's executing on that in a way that leads to these results. So I would say that'd probably be my tip for modern marketers.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. But say Twitter is a platform where you have all the public conversation. Musk describes it as the town hall of all conversation across the group. But how do you create a niche for yourself on, say, a platform like Twitter? So, where there is a lot of noise and there are others, a conversation started around your brand can easily be driven to something else. How do you create as a marketer or a community manager, create a niche for your brand? People keep coming back.
Yeah. So to be honest, I think that is what I've seen. Okay, there's two parts, right? There's a personal branding exercise. So you as a marketer, you can leverage your personal brand if you have a strong personality. And when I say strong personality, it doesn't really matter whether you're an extrovert or introvert. If anything, online personalities, many introverts do a lot better online than extroverts do. And I think that's because, you don't have to worry as much about the social interaction side that, you experience face to face. But when you do that, consistency is a big part of this. You're creating cues, rituals, and people can know what to expect from you when you keep showing up. That's one of the hardest parts when it comes to building up the brand and getting people to stay, regardless of the fact that you're on a public platform like Twitter. And that's key, because a lot of times people think that you need to create a closed environment to retain, but not necessarily. If you have something strong to say and you're consistent about it, people will form around those ideas, and then you can move them into private communities to get those same fans, right, that start off that way, start connecting with each other. That's where you start building the micro communities.
Absolutely. I think consistency is the keyword there. Sort of throwing out your idea, sort of pushing your idea on Twitter, and being consistent about it can drive a lot of sort of engagement for you as a personal brand. Moving ahead and talking about what should be your target audience, as in when you get started, who should be you reaching out if you're building a micro community, and what are the pitfalls you need to avoid? So who not to reach out, and what are the key sort of pain points or the key value add you can provide to this audience? So what matters for them?
Yeah, this is great, and it's also fascinating because I mentioned ChatGPT. All the questions you're asking me are really good questions to ask ChatGPT for general, right?
Yeah.
General things these days. But I would say that when it's coming to target audience, it always helps for you to target people who are on a platform that you are familiar with, because it means it'll be easier for you to stick around if you are doing the engaging. So you can use ChatGPT to do some basic research of the industry or market and get it to refine things for you. But then you obviously need to go and start doing that work, and reaching out to those people, etc. And of course, who you should target will be different based on what your business goals are. And the generally, from what I've seen, being across multiple different sectors, is that if you go after the innovator types or the early adopter types, they're usually good folks to reach out to in the beginning. But again, it can be different based on what it is you're offering, the product or service you have. And so experimentation and taking action is the key here.
Got it. But what happens if everyone is asking the same question to ChatGPT and they are going to get the same responses? They might do the same action, but where are the nuances? So,
So this is where actually what I really find fascinating. There is now a marketplace for AI prompts. So I'll see if I can get the URL for everybody, but there's a new job title called AI prompt engineer or prompt crafters. And this is because asking specific questions to ChatGPT is how you're able to refine those answers. So yes, ChatGPT is the equivalent of getting like an average person, right, as an assistant to help you out and source that information. That's where it is good. But in terms of refining, as I said, you're still going to find that out by taking action on those things, and then seeing for yourself, right, how people are reacting in general. And I use a tool called Common Room. If you haven't heard of it, highly recommend it. And they're doing really good things from an analytics and insight standpoint. And if you use
fascinating to see how much of that process was actually being improved by ChatGPT. So content creation is a big part of community management. So from that standpoint, it's really helped. The things that I think ChatGPT won't be able to do is, the real-time interactions with others. There's a point where people will either want to see the face of the person behind an account, especially if you're in a chat group or something. And I think people are becoming a bit savvy to when you're talking to a chatbot versus a human being. However, ChatGPT is getting better. So, like with anything that is computer generated, there's a point where sometimes we might not be able to tell the difference. I can tell you that when the ICO craze was happening in 2017, I was quite amazed by the social engineering that was going on back then in terms of fake accounts and people behind the scenes who were pretending to be people that they weren't. Now, granted, that was not AI or machine learning taking place. Those are just literally people behind pretending to be other people. But it's doable. And I saw communities within Telegram groups, scale to 1 million, a couple 100,000. And it was insane to me to see how many people literally at 8 a.m., a whole bunch of people would just start talking, right? Because these are all automated things going on. And it generated conversations that even I, if I wasn't aware of what was going on, would have looked at that and be like, oh, these are genuine people and genuine conversations. But now that I know better, I kind of know what to look out for. And there are tools that you can actually find to determine whether or not who you're talking to is a bot or not. And this is from being able to process large data sets, go through natural language processing, and help humans out with that too. So I think human beings, as we get more familiar with the tool, like ChatGPT, there are other tools that are coming out to also help us find out if we are talking to a real person or not, because I think we will want to know that.
Yeah, I think this conversation can go on diving deep into ChatGPT and the applications that it can provide in the coming days. Moving ahead, I think Sneha. Yeah. So I think this is a follow-up to the previous question. So how do you decipher what is the value you can provide to your community members in terms of what they want and what you can provide, and you can sort of find the right sort of cross section for that. And in terms of their behavior, in terms of the value you can provide, how do you find the right fit when building out a community, and what should you focus on? Yeah.
Multidimensional. In terms of focusing on, this is an interesting one. I tend to still like doing things a bit manually for some of these processes when you're scoping out who to target. So, back in the day, I would use Google Sheets to just literally list out, okay, here's a person I met, here's their age, demographic, blah, blah. Again, there are many tools out there that can help you determine that quickly while you're speaking to folks on either Twitter or LinkedIn. I would use tools with LinkedIn that would allow me to sort of export those details once I've found them. And then I would kind of look at that and refine it as I spoke to people. In community management, there's a saying, do things that don't scale. And I think that's still actually quite relevant because many people, especially in startup phase, often try to scale things before you're ready to, right? So you try to solve problems that may come down the line, but actually, you kind of haven't earned your right yet to get to that point. So doing things that don't scale, which is just reaching out to people, one by one, can help. When I'm actually joining a larger company, I'll do a sort of 90-day audit where I will reach out to 150 of sort of the top employees or top people, and I'll literally have half an hour chats with every single one of them. That's a lot of time, but it also allows me to get a good sense emotionally, myself, and then compare that to any data that I can get about the same group from either studies that have been done before, surveys, reports, or even using some of the tools that are available now to be able to just analyze a large group right online using their publicly available data.
Got it. I think two things that come to mind discussing this is one, you were talking about LinkedIn. I was thinking that even after all these years, email is still relevant, even in community.
100%.
And social media has come up. There are all these chat tools with real-time navigation, Twitter, Discord, Telegram, etc. I think email is still relevant. And secondly, bringing a bit of empathy when building out a community is very important. And as you mentioned, you talk to the initial 100 people of a company and getting the right sort of responses to them for them to understand what does the product mean for them is another major step for you to sort of scale a community. And moving ahead, I think this is sort of opening my insight also in terms of sort of how do I look at community building. Going ahead, so how do you keep your community very important or sort of relevant in the longer term, and how do you keep that drumbeat coming? So getting the first 10 users who might be your ambassador might be a different set of skills, and then you might have to sort of scale up to say that these ambassadors might help me out to reaching out to the next 10, 20 or a 50. How do you communicate and have as we mentioned, having a consistency of thought and sort of your insight around a space or an idea around which you're building a community? How do you stay relevant when building out a community?
Yeah, I think it's creating a virtuous feedback loop between yourself, your brand, and the people you're serving, right? So that micro community. And I think micro communities, if you do have a product or a brand where you do need to focus on continued growth, outside of the general size of a micro community, you can still keep that micro community as the OGs, right? They can be your founding members. They can be your champion group. They can be your ambassadors. I've seen a lot of communities actually fail to tap into or leverage those OG members, the ones who were there at the beginning, the early adopters. They'll often get like just dropped or left out, once the company scales and grows to a certain size. But I think you do a big disservice to those people who invested in you in the early days and put in a lot of time. So I think you can tap into that and get a lot of help and support from that group by continuously engaging with them or just offering them perks even to stay on with you.
Got it. Sort of keeping them sort of relevant and offering perks to them, and also making them part of your journey is important for you to drive the next stage of growth of the community. Yeah, I think next one. Yeah, so I think this is again a follow-up. In a longer term, you've done all the right things and you build out a community which is engaged and they are finding values in being part of the community. But how do you when do you start monetizing and make them part of your marketing and sales journey? So, and how do you bring that into action and not sort of create disillusion for them, that not be pushing? So, yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced this myself for some of my own communities and even others that I've worked on or worked with. And the best way to deal with that is to set the expectations up front, right at the beginning. So at the end of the day, if you can be open, honest, and upfront, then it allows your community to grow with you and to also know what to expect. So this depends on your personality. This depends on sort of the approach that you want to go with. For example, this is a good example, ChatGPT, right? It started out as a free thing and it's just gone bonkers. And I think now they're looking to start charging people. It makes sense to start charging because no way that could continue going on for free.
Yeah.
And so people are a little bit more open to it. I think they expected that because there's so much value being provided.
Yeah.
Whereas with community, sometimes that value isn't always as clear cut, right? Yeah. If you just got sort of a subscription to an exclusive group, right? Say, NFTs and what have you. People have community leaders or community founders have often shot themselves in the foot by not being upfront about the fact that they're going to charge eventually, because a community gets formed, everybody's creating good vibes, things are going well, and then all of a sudden, the founder may be like, okay, now we're just going to start charging you. That only doesn't work when expectations haven't been set from the beginning that we're eventually going to charge. Most people should realize that if a community is being formed around a brand that is a business, that's my general rule. Is like I know that they're going to charge at some point if it is a business, if there is a product or service, but most people don't think that. And so I think it's just very important for you to be upfront from the get-go. That way you can build a culture of people who are aware, who are savvy.
Yeah, I think if the values they provide is very important in terms of how it delivers their initial pitch. I think this is true for ChatGPT, Midjourney, and all the products that are popular right now. So I think that organically helps you sort of have a paywall. And secondly, I think if you're being sort of upfront in the initial time, when you're setting up the community and setting up the path that this is how we will take it up in the future, will not create hurdles for you in the longer term.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we can go ahead, Sneha. Yeah, I think I think the initial time went in super fast. I think something that's very relevant is ChatGPT and what kind of impact will AI have for us in the longer term. Chatbot is one part of it. I think AI will start delivering value when it can initiate a response based on the data it has. Say for a community, if you get a bunch of analytics that I think this source is beneficial for us, and if we can take the next step to actually build on that, this can be, I think, the next step in terms of AI for the community space. What are your thoughts for, say, for AI and community? Where would things go? Yeah.
I think the ideal scenario would be a co-creation process, and play with it yourself. I've been doing a lot of playing with it, and I'm seeing that there are things that it is good for, and there are things that it is not good for. But I do like the logic system that it's using. As an example, finding creative connections. So recently, I had asked ChatGPT to find the similarities between Genghis Khan or Chinggis, Mohirai Ueshiba, who is the founder of Aikido, a martial art, and King Kamehameha, the leader who united the Hawaiian Islands, right? And at first, the prompt was, oh, there are no similarities between these three people because they all come from three different countries and places. And then it went on to just list like what they've done in their lifetimes. Then I said to it, what about the fact that they have all been involved in some form of unifying action in some way, shape, or form? Then ChatGPT came back and said, actually, yes, you are correct. If we look at the unifying aspect, all three of these characters have actually unified in some way, shape, or form, and then went ahead to list how they've unified. Genghis Khan united the Mongol, the nomadic tribes. Mohirai Ueshiba united different forms of martial arts to create Aikido. And then King Kamehameha united the Hawaiian Islands, right? Okay. So that is a creative connection that isn't always as obvious at the beginning, but human beings can actually provide those sort of creative connections, and it's going to learn too, right? So this is what I find fascinating. And I think that's where ChatGPT can be powerful, because it can also provide some logic prompts to back up your creative connections. And I think if we can learn how to do more of that, we can use ChatGPT to get to solutions faster. I think that's what I'm seeing.
Got it. I think the follow-up part of a ChatGPT conversation is interesting, where you can sort of ask the second question and the follow-up questions, and it can dive deeper into the information it has and the information you've provided. Yeah, I think creating sort of engagement in the community can be part of chatbot or AI. But I think, the space where it can take an action for a data will be very interesting, how that pans out. That would create, because it should be able to read data better than a human, right? Without the biases, and take up steps to create the action for that analytics. Yeah, I think we should open it up for questions, as we have people who might be interested in asking one. So you can drop the question in the chat window or come online, show your faces, and just let's have a conversation. Yeah. So let's wait for a couple of seconds for anyone who's interested in asking questions. As people come up, we can talk about platforms like Common Room and what is the value they are providing. Say have you have a community on Discord, are you present on Instagram, Slack, etc. How does a platform which is a unifying platform getting you data from all the places and suggesting you what might be the next steps, or even automating your sort of welcome messages to creating engagement messages? How do you utilize a platform like Common Room?
Common Room, there's a lot of social media monitoring tools out. I think what Common Room does a lot better for me is that it surfaces, as an example, like the top 3 social media posts for you to focus on. And then it'll give you insights directly with those top 3 that will help you shift, the engagement a certain way as needed. Because sometimes as a community manager, especially if you're dealing with let's say if you're dealing with a lot of different communities, how do you be across all of them without being in each of the different platforms? So once you start moving into head of community positions or director of community positions, you may experience that dilemma of kind of being across too many different communities to manage them effectively. And so at that point, all you need to do is focus on the top 3 items or the top 3 conversations, and I guess go into those and see if you can engage or share or like or what have you. Because Common Room is also doing sentiment analysis, and sentiment analysis is a tricky one. It's not always good because you have to also help the machine understand what is positive and negative based on your own brand. Because if it just goes off of just the words, sometimes it'll pick something up as negative, but really they're actually saying that it's positive, right? So context.
Got it.
So with that on the sentiment side, we understand that when we're looking at the numbers for sentiment, we have to have some degree of variance or allow for that, so that we're not just making our decisions on faulty numbers. But for everything else, Common Room is able to sort of pull information that is publicly available, right? This is stuff that is all across the internet. I don't know specifically how they're doing that. All I know is that they're doing it really well and really quick in a way that allows me to get the information I need straight away. So as an example, if you're wanting to use a community as sort of a lead generator, anytime someone mentions a certain hashtag, mentions a certain person from your company, they enter your ecosystem. And then those companies' details will be pulled in. The LinkedIn, Twitter profile details are all attached to the account within Common Room. And you can pass that information on to your sales team and be like, hey, these people from these companies, these are sort of like the top 3 to 5 for the day. I suggest you reach out to them because they mentioned us or said something about us. And it shows proactiveness. A lot of community managers in the past have been reactive. Common Room allows me to be a lot more proactive. And I think that's the key thing here.
Got it. I think I think this is important. If you can be the sort of create a chain where you can reach out to your customers right there and then when they're talking about you or when they're facing a problem which might be related to the brand or the value you provide. I think this is interesting direction. We have a couple of companies building out in the space. But the another follow-up question to this is, how is it different from a social media management tool versus community management? Aren't these the same things we were doing it when we started off building out on Facebook, say, for important when it was relevant?
Yeah, these tools, as I mentioned, there's multiple monitoring tools that are out. I think it's the way in which they do it that I find to be better. So it's one of those things where you will have to try it out for yourself to see, if that is the case for you or not. But as someone who's constantly testing out new tool to see how I can do things better, Common Room, for me personally, has just been a lot more efficient and I think smarter with their insights. So as an example, Google Analytics, right? One of sort of the OG analytics tools. It's collecting similar data, but the way that it presents it is, in my opinion, sometimes not always helpful, right? It's just a bunch of metrics and numbers that you almost need training on in order to understand. And this goes back to ChatGPT. It's turning everything into more natural language, where we can get the insights that we need in a way that we understand quickly, not needing specialized training in order to understand. I think that's what Common Room is doing for me, at least.
Got it. I think the way you present the data and the actionables are important while delivering value to the customers in case of, say, a common rule. I think this was an interesting session. If you want to conclude, give your last insight on the topic we were sort of focusing on, which is micro communities and how do you build and grow a micro community. So any concluding statement? Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I think the main thing, or the reason why I wanted to talk about micro communities, because, well, one, my word for the year is micro. So I am actually focusing on all things micro, from micro communities to micro payments, probably now down to nano payments, and even micro nations. Right,
Yeah.
Looking at small island nations that can leverage emerging technologies to help them connect in with the global ecosystem, the global market, and when it comes to micro communities, I think there's a big opportunity for a lot of creators who sometimes they don't necessarily need to follow the same path of a highly scalable startup, right? They don't necessarily need to raise a lot of funds. They don't need to pursue that sort of performance, they're called, lifestyle, where you're managing multiple people, large team, etc. There are many creators who are one-person business owners that are earning way more than startup founders who have a large team, lots of overheads, and shareholders to report to. And so these creators, these one-person businesses, can have a very strong, profitable business from, say, 100 people. So you do the math. You have 100 people paying you $99 a month or something. You can have a very good life for yourself just on that alone. And I think with all of these tools and technologies coming out, it's just making it that much more feasible. So take advantage of it. We're living in a really interesting period in time, and micro communities can become very profitable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think micro communities are relevant for creators when they're building it out. And if you have an engaged community who can rally with you in your journey, I think that's wonderful and is very important for you to actually grow as a brand. So thanks, George, for joining in to talk about and help us learn about micro communities and community as a space in general. With the introduction of Chat GPT and the whole conversation around it, how AI would sort of work toward the content creation part to, I think, automation in the future. And this, I think it was, I think you've dropped in the link for Chat GPT. I think your Twitter and LinkedIn profile is also there. And if it's not, I think Sneha will drop in, and you can reach out to George on these platforms to learn about the community space. If you have any questions, do reach out to us or George, and I will be happy to actually sort of talk about it. Thanks, George, and thanks everyone for joining in, and have a great year ahead, everyone. Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
See y'all.
See you.